I'm the director of YIISA, and I literally just came back from Geneva from the Durban conference, so I'm going to take about 10 minutes to just sort of give you an update on what happened in Geneva, and I guess from a personal, eyewitness account, some of the issues that happened at the conference at the United Nations. And I'll just speak briefly for 10 minutes, and then I'll have the privilege and honor to introduce Professor Esther Webman to you. So basically, the Durban process, as it's called, as you know, it's a major international United Nations conference dealing with issues of racism and other forms of discrimination. And as I'm sure most of you know, 2001 was the original Durban conference, which, among other things, became a bit of a fiasco regarding issues of anti-Semitism and bashing of Israel. That especially the NGO forum, which was attended by tens of thousands of people, in part really became a very ugly spectacle of bashing Israel and of strong expressions of anti-Semitism. And there was a fear that the same thing would be repeated again in Geneva as the follow-up conference. And the fear, I guess, was reinforced by the idea of the fact that Iran and Libya were the two countries that were sort of chairing this whole process. So if you can imagine, two of the most, greatest human rights violators in the world were actually in charge of this whole conference and process and the proceedings. So there was a lot of fear that there'd be a repeat of 2001. So I'm happy to say that in general the repeat didn't happen. That the fact, I think, that it was held in Geneva as opposed to South Africa, which is perhaps more accessible to NGOs and for other reasons, I think that this process was not as bad. I attended the sessions in the plenary sessions on last Friday, and it was incredible. It was incredible to witness the procedures of the United Nations. They've been debating. The countries have been debating the text of the document that they're trying to pass, and they finally adopted on Wednesday. But they've been debating this for years. And they finally, on Friday at 6 o'clock, when time was running out because the interpreters have to leave, they have a union contract, so they leave at 6 o'clock. So literally at 2 minutes to 6, the countries voted on adopting the wording, the text, or the language of the text. And the countries voted in favor of it without reading the text. So after years of preparation, they actually voted on a text that they didn't read. So I found that very bizarre, but I was told by people that this is what happens on a fairly regular basis. So I found that astounding. Monday, as you probably know, marked the time when the Iranian delegation led by Mr. Ahmadinejad, President Ahmadinejad, came to the UN. On Sunday evening, he was actually welcomed by the Swiss president for a private dinner. And this is something that was not necessary. I think everybody has the right to attend the United Nations. There are some legal scholars who think that Ahmadinejad actually has the right to be arrested for incitement to genocide and other human rights violations. But that whole issue aside, because it's a great area of debate among scholars, so legal experts and scholars, that putting to aside, there was no need for the President of Switzerland, I believe, to have a private dinner with Ahmadinejad, who represents not only incitement to genocide vis-a-vis the Israeli-Jewish question, but also the horrific human rights violations that are taking place within the Iranian domestic context. I just don't understand why on the eve of Yom HaShoah, on the day of Holocaust, the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day, that the President of Switzerland, of all countries, entertained Mr. Ahmadinejad. Monday was actually a bit of a circus. It was the busiest day of the conference, and when the delegation arrived, there was a bit of mayhem. I actually found myself in a corridor with Ahmadinejad and his entourage, which was interesting. They sort of walked by me, and they went into a a hallway to go to the plenary session, and the guards closed the door, and I was left in the corridor with about 50 people from his entourage, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran. And I actually shook his hand and basically told him that the whole world is watching, and one day he'll probably end up in jail. But it was an interesting moment of exchanging greetings. But the thing that really shocked me, there were two things that shocked me. After he went into the plenary session, there were 50 people, and I was one of the few outsiders of this group. These are leading civil servants and bureaucrats and politicians. They started to chant Allah Akbar and other jihad chants, which I didn't understand. And it was something that I'll never forget. They were screaming as if somebody was trying to harm them or kill them, or they were in pain. They were screaming. I've never seen adults scream with such fervor and energy something in my life. And I was just watching in disbelief. I was with another friend of mine from Israel. She ran away. She was terrified. But I stayed and listened, and I actually spoke to people afterwards and had the opportunity to exchange ideas with some of their media correspondents and other diplomats and people. And I asked them questions about Israel and the Jewish people and all that sort of thing. And I had wonderful exchanges. And I would just say that coming away from these very sort of rational discussions about Judaism and Islam and the future of Israel and the future of the Zionist entity, all I would have to say is that the things that we read about, and I'm sure we're going to actually hear about it today in Esther's paper, in terms of Holocaust denial and perceptions of Israel and perceptions of the conspiracy, as we had in other sessions, as sort of the protocols of the Elder Design and that whole narrative as a view to see the Jews and to see Israel, is very much real and very much alive. Even over coffee and having rational conversations, they really, I would say from my rational mind and I guess from my heart, that these guys are the real deal. That they mean what they say. That they're really out to destroy the state of Israel and the Zionist entity, and they really believe that Jews fabricated or exaggerated the Holocaust to conspire to expropriate money from the Europeans to go and build the state of Israel. That this is how they see the world. This is what they really believe, and I think they believe that they're actually going to do something positive by ridding the world of this problem, i.e. Israel. So on that level, it was actually quite helpful in terms of my research and the things that I'm concerned about, because it's one thing, I suppose, to read historical accounts or sociological accounts or ideology and sort of social theory and all the stuff that we're engaged here in YIISA, but actually to meet people who are connected to the regime in Iran and have honest and open conversations with them was an opportunity to really understand the mind of the enemy. And I believe that they are clearly the enemy, and they know exactly what they want to do, and they're out to achieve it. I'd say two small other quick accounts that I'll give you. I think for the first time in the 5 or 6 years that I've become engaged in this issue of anti-Semitism, of contemporary anti-Semitism, I'd say for the first time I am really optimistic. And I'm optimistic because of the students that were present in Geneva. There were mainly Jewish European and Israeli students who came. There were about 100 to 150 students who were quite educated, aware, they were strong, they acted as sort of in a selfless manner, and they're helping people and helping each other. They knew the issues, they're well-read, they're energetic, they're out to organize, they're out to bring awareness, they're not apologetic. And I think that something began in Geneva, and I think their experience in Geneva just reinforced the whole idea of what they're trying to now struggle for, to end not only anti-Semitism and not only the denial of Israel's right to exist and the Holocaust and all of this stuff, but they also ended up meeting with dissidents from Iran and different dissidents from other parts of the world. And there's a natural coalition of people of all sorts of backgrounds that are now very much working together, starting to work together on this extraordinarily radical form of Islam. And it was really wonderful to see. I also had meetings with people from the Organization of the Islamic countries, mainly from Africa, and they are also extraordinarily concerned about the rise of radical Islam and Iran and the mess in the Middle East and how it's beginning to affect their societies. And I think there's all sorts of natural coalitions that are beginning, maybe percolating, to emerge. And I think for the first time, I'm optimistic. I think there's hope that's beginning to develop to confront this social movement, which is very dangerous. And not just dangerous to Israel and Jews, but dangerous, perhaps most dangerous of all, to the people that this movement, their fellow citizens and the people that they dwell next to, the people they go to mosques with, the people that they work with, that the pressures that moderate, average, everyday people are under is increasing, and I think they're the ones who suffer the most. So this was good. I spoke on the day of Yom HaShoah inside the UN on a panel. I spoke twice, but on the day of Yom HaShoah, I spoke on a panel that dealt with issues of racism and genocide, and it was a group of people from Pakistan, Canada, myself, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, from Africa, Rwandan Holocaust, genocide survivor. And when I spoke, there was a lot of Iranians in the room. Actually, they came to hear me apparently. And I asked for a moment of silence. The fact that the United Nations was created and the whole human rights legislation and laws and conventions and treaties emerged out of the ashes of the Holocaust. I thought that the fact that we were in the United Nations, the building that was created from the ruins of the Shoah, that we would take a moment of reflection and meditation to think about the victims of the Holocaust. And I asked for everybody to stand and to have a moment of silence. So of course, I kind of knew this, the Iranians in the room, and there was also people from the Tarakat, the small Jewish sect of people, Tarakat. There was two people from this group that were also there. So the Iranians and these two so-called rabbis didn't stand up. And we had a moment of silence, and then I explained in my speech why they didn't stand up. And they didn't stand up because they think that the Holocaust is a lie. They think that I, who would think about commemorating the victims of the Holocaust as part of the Zionist Jewish conspiracy to extort money from Europe, and they sort of went into the whole discourse and the whole idea of the protocols of the elders of Zion, and how Iran and other forces in the Islamic world are now in the business of exporting this horrific form of genocidal anti-Semitism in the narrative of the protocols of the elders of Zion, and how it's having an effect. And I would say that in terms of the global influence of anti-Semitism and the protocols, on the one hand, I think it was a victory what happened in Geneva, that Iran and the hate fest against Israel was thwarted, or it was successfully stopped, if not stopped, almost stopped. But at the same time, we have to be, I think, aware that the fact that Ahmadinejad came to the United Nations, and he was the only world leader to come to the United Nations, and he spoke of Jewish power, and he spoke to Western power and dominance, and he spoke about the clique of people that's destroying society, that this horrible form of anti-Semitism, and the fact that he spoke at UN and had this pulpit to spread it, will have an effect, because the people who are dispossessed around the world will see him as somebody who is, if not misguided, but somebody who has their interests at heart, or is the only one to speak to power in the UN, and all the European white countries which are controlled by the Jews and all the conspiracy theories will resonate in some parts of the world in this news cycle, and it will have an effect. So on the one hand, there's I think a victory, but on the other hand, the hatred of anti-Semitism is being dispersed and diffused throughout the world, and Ahmadinejad used the world's media this week at one level effectively to spread it. So we have to be aware that these processes of anti-Semitism continue in a very serious manner. We have to, as scholars, really look at the reality of this in a very serious way, and to use all of our resources and our interdisciplinary expertise here and in other places to really try to grasp what's happening and what are the ramifications of this, of these events and of these narratives which are now spreading in the age of globalization. So, a victory, but very serious issues. So, on that note, and I guess in a very strongly connected way, we're very privileged to have Professor Esther Webman here today. She's going to speak about continuity and change in the Arab Holocaust Discourse. Currently, Professor Webman is the acting director of the Stephen Roth Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism and Racism at Tel Aviv University. And as most of you probably know, there's, I guess, 4 institutes dealing with anti-Semitism in the world. We're the newest and smallest, and then there's the Technical University of Berlin, and there's the Vidal Sassoon Center at Hebrew University, and the one at Tel Aviv University. Professor Webman received a PhD from Tel Aviv University, and she won awards for her thesis. Her thesis was received with great distinction, which focused on Egypt during on Egyptian society and its response to the Holocaust. She has many publications, and the most recent is entitled, it's a book entitled From Empathy to Denial, Arab Response to the Holocaust, which was written with Professor Meir of Litvak, also of Tel Aviv University. So, welcome, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me. And I apologize, first of all. There's no microphone here. Sorry, but I got sick apparently from the hectic week that we always have on the occasion of Holocaust Memorial Day, and it's run from one place to the other. Anyway, I would like to open my presentation with a short story, Mendel the Bookseller, which was published in February '45 in a leading Egyptian cultural weekly at the time, and was dedicated to Stefan Zweig. This is unthinkable today. Although the time frame of the story is set in World War I, the implication for World War II could be easily discerned. The hero of the story, an Egyptian scholar, describes a visit to Vienna 20 years after he completed his studies there. While wandering around the city, he enters haphazardly a coffee house where he used to sit and meet with the mythological figure Jacob Mendel, the bookseller, who sat there every day, always ready to share at length his knowledge with others. In an attempt to trace the fate of the man who captivated him with his unique personality, the author interrogates an old cloakroom lady, and she recounts Mendel's life from his arrival to Vienna from the East until his tragic death. She tells the scholars that with the outbreak of war, 2 unidentified soldiers, but unmistakably Germans, according to how he presents them, burst into the coffee house and took him away, and he went missing for 2 years. Due to complaint letters that he sent to publishers in France and Britain for not receiving a book or a periodical on time, he was suspected of maintaining contacts with the enemy and thus taken to a concentration camp. Upon his arrest, it was discovered that he never bothered to arrange his permanent Austrian nationality papers. It is unclear what happened to him in the camps at the author, although, and I quote, "The world had witnessed lately the horrors of the war." After his release, Mendel never returned to his former self, and his physical and mental situation had badly deteriorated, the old lady said. He became strange and repulsive. A few days later, he stormed into the place again, bewildered and agitated, and on that night, he died. But Mendel left behind a small book that the lady had kept, although she does not read and write. She showed the book to the narrator, and he identifies it as a prayer book. Filled with remorse for forgetting about Mendel all those years, he praises her and asks her to preserve the book because our friend Mendel would have been happy to know that at least one person from the thousands of those who enjoyed his kindness still remembers him. Another Egyptian literary monthly a year later published a short essay by Egyptian renowned author Ahsen, describing a trip by boat from Alexandria to Beirut via Haifa. On the boat, he met displaced Jews on their way to Palestine. They were weak, he wrote, children, girls, and women who lost their husbands and all they had, even the slightest hope. Some of them had lost all, but life was flourishing inside them, enlightening their wounded heart with hope and despair, satisfaction and love, comfort and pain. Hussein asserted that those immigrants were enforced on the inhabitants of Palestine, and there were other places that could absorb them better than Palestine. Does this sound familiar? But he felt compassion, on the other hand, toward them. Seeing them off the boat aroused in him, as he said, anger, outrage, pity, and sorrow. This essay apparently angered many Egyptian intellectuals who thought that Hussein was repeating Zionist propaganda. Yet others considered it as an example of Egyptian intellectuals' ability to differentiate between Zionism as a political movement and ideology and Judaism as a religion, and between their antagonism towards Zionism and their sympathy toward the persecuted Jews. These are two examples of the early references to the Holocaust in Arab papers after the war. While the first story expresses a clear empathy with the persecuted Jew and recognition of the universal cultural heritage he left behind, the second, despite its hidden compassion, already illustrates the entanglement of politics with the issue of the Holocaust. The idea that the displaced should return to their original homeland or absorbed by other states, such as the US and the British Empire, was raised by officials in the deliberations on the future of Palestine, as well as in the public discourse. Undoubtedly, and I quote, a solution has to be found for the Jewish problem, but colonizing Palestine is not a solution to the universal Jewish problem, and it would be unjust to demand solely from the Arabs to solve it at their expense, was a frequent reaction to the political developments. The basic Arab approach toward the Holocaust stemmed from the standpoint that it does not concern them. It was a tragedy of another people which took place outside the Middle East, and they were not involved in causing it or perpetrating it. Yet, allegedly due to it, they were dealt an injustice and were forced to pay the price, the wrong which befell the Jews. The price meant the loss of Palestine to the Jews. If it was not for the Holocaust, Israel would not have come to exist. The proximity of events and of World War II with the urgent need to solve the Jewish problem and the establishment of the State of Israel led to their convergence and the creation of a causality relationship between them. As a result of this conviction, the Arabs could not separate the attitude toward the Holocaust from their attitude and animosity toward Israel and Zionism. The resistance to the establishment of Israel as the solution to the Jewish problem overshadowed their ability and willingness to acknowledge and sympathize with the Jewish tragedy. It was an instinctive reaction which was gradually buttressed by ideological, political, and even cultural themes. I'm focusing on the early period from the end of the war to 48 because it was unique in its diversity and exposed a whole range of attitudes towards the Holocaust. It was during this period that the conceptual foundation was laid down. Three basic approaches could be discerned in the Arab leaders' references to the Holocaust during this period. One recognized the Jewish tragedy, but sought to separate it from the question of Palestine and present it as an international humanitarian problem in whose solution the Arabs could take part. Thus, it was possible to express compassion for Jewish pain together with unequivocal rejection of Jewish immigration to Palestine and of Zionist political goals. Such an attitude was congruent with the aspirations of Arab elites to be integrated in the post-war world order and with their awareness of Arab dependency on Britain and the US. The second approach sought to understate or minimize the meaning of the Holocaust by using ambiguous terms or depicting it as a problem of civil discrimination, going as far as partial or complete denial. The third accused the Zionist movement or the Jews for what befell them. The Holocaust became a matter of growing concern to Arab leaders following a range of consecutive events, beginning with President Truman's proposal on 16 August 1945 to allow the immigration of 100,000 displaced Jews to Palestine, the establishment of the Anglo-American Committee on 13 November 1945, and its subsequent recommendations, as well as the formation of UNSCOP, United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, on 15 May 1947, which led to the resolution on the partition of Palestine on 29 November that year, and the establishment of the State of Israel on 14 May 1948. The question what Arab leaders and intellectuals who influenced and shaped the public discourse knew is critical for examining their attitudes and representations of the Holocaust. The evolving 45-48 discourse clearly shows that there was a flow of information and certain knowledge about it existed, at least among Arab intellectuals and politicians. The Arab press, and particularly the Egyptian, covered the developments in Europe, including the fate of the Jews, quite extensively. The interest and reference to the Jews under Nazi rule did not stem only from the narrow prism of the evolving Middle Eastern conflict. Arab interest evolved at least among those agents of culture who led the public debates from a sense of affiliation with the victorious camp and its culture of values, a position which Islamist writers, most notably Sayyid Qutb, who later became the spiritual leader of the radical Islamic movement, often criticized for the unjustified trust in Britain and the US. Report on Allied advances and the horrors that they encountered in the Nazi camp, or the coverage of the Nuremberg trials, were not unusual. The same could be said in reference to the Jews. Yet, due to the political developments, this flow of information had been gradually suppressed to avoid a clash with the war efforts against the Zionist enemy and its state. The claims raised in relation to the Holocaust stemmed from the intensifying political disagreement over the fate of Palestine. They were a reaction to the unfolding reality, perceived as a violation of an existential, a cosmic order, and as a result of Zionist Western cooperation and a plot against the Arabs and Islam. They attempted at maneuvering between acknowledgement of the Holocaust and the undeniable information about it, pushed them aside. This is obvious in the official as well as in public discourses, which strived as much as possible to separate the solution of the Jewish problem, epitomized in the need to settle displaced survivors, and the Palestine problem. Once the linkage between the two problems was made in the recommendation of the Anglo-American Committee and the subsequent UN committees and resolution, discourse shifted toward blurring the meaning of the Holocaust, ignoring it, and shaking off any recognition of its human aspects. In its reaction to UNSCOP's recommendation, published on 31st August 47, calling for the partition of Palestine into two states, a Jewish and an Arab, the Arab public debate ceased to express any compassion for past Jewish suffering, making only few allusions to the past Jewish harmonious life with the Arabs. 2 points assumed ever-growing importance: the accusation of inflating the scope of the persecution of the Jews in Europe by Zionism to justify the claim over Palestine and extort the world's conscience, and the argument that the Jewish state would not provide security to the Jews in general and Middle Eastern Jewry in particular. The recommendation was seen as a further violation of the principles of justice and legitimate right, and a mark of disgrace on the forehead of human justice. Could the world, which fought the Nazi tyranny and founded the United Nations, agree to the results of that awful partition, wondered our writers. Another emerging theme was the equation of Zionism with Nazism, ideology, aspirations, and praxis. A leading liberal Islamic thinker who was a harsh critic of Nazism before and during the war made a systematic effort to equate Zionism with Nazism. The Jews, he said, were among the first victims of the gangs famous for their brown shirts. And the irony of history is that this type of gang regime had disappeared from Germany and all other parts of the world, except Palestine among the Jews. He also pointed to the similar Nazi and Zionist desire for world domination and warned the Zionists that they might end up as the Nazis. The struggle against Zionism became a major component in the public discourse of all ideological trends and an integral part of national identity and commitment for national liberation. Arab intellectuals perceived the need to confront Zionism as an existential challenge. The debate over the Zionist movement, its ideology, its political ambition, and its nature focused on the allegedly racist aspects of the Zionist ideology, which reflect Nazism and fascism. The need to find a national home for the Jews were compared to the Nazi call to persecute the Jews, and the Middle East was described as the living space in the Zionist ideology, which corresponds to East and Southeast Europe in Hitler's view. Zionists control the financial and economic markets as well as the world media, it had been claimed, and therefore they pose a political and economic threat for all Arab countries. I'm afraid, concluded one writer, that Hitler was the Jews' disciple who learned racism from them. This representation of Zionism radicalized on the eve of the establishment of Israel. It was described as the heir of Nazism, exceeding Nazi chauvinism in its zealous nationalism. The purported belief in the notion of the chosen people, designated by God to rule other peoples, which reflect the superiority of the Jewish race and its ambition to control the world, was also compared to the Aryan race's superiority complex and Nazi ambitions. Therefore, according to this logic, the clash between them was inevitable. Another motif that emerged already before the end of the war and became more prominent after the war in Palestine was the equation between the fate of the Jews and that of the Palestinians, thereby minimizing the scope of the Holocaust and transforming its victims into criminals equal to or worse than the Nazis. Imposing a Jewish state on Palestine exceeds in its tyranny and aggression the greatest crimes carried out by the Axis states. And Al-Aram editorial wondered if anyone could imagine a time in which the Jews, who had been subjected for generations to harshest oppressions and tyrannies, would do the same to others. The Zionist efforts to dislodge people from their homes and disperse them constitute the same disaster which the Jews had experienced. In the coming years, all the themes which were identified in this early period were developed and came to typify the Arab representation of the Holocaust. Although they did not constitute a systematic, coherent narrative, one can discern a trend moving from recognition of the event as a human disaster which the Arabs were ready to share its burden, to alienation, justification, relativization, and denial. Arab preoccupation with the Holocaust focused on its political ramifications and hence instilled the notion that Arabs had to bear the brunt of deeds perpetrated in Europe by Europeans, causing what they considered as an even greater disaster. The diversity of voices was substituted by a tendentious discourse that increasingly utilized the Holocaust as a tool in the rhetoric against Israel and Zionism. In the course of my work with Dr. Meir Litva, we have discerned several major themes. 1, empathy and acknowledgement. 2, justification. 3, denial. 4, alleged collaboration between Zionism and Nazism in the extermination of European Jews. Equation between Nazism and Zionism and between Israeli policy toward the Palestinians and Nazi policies toward the Jews. Relativization, inversion of victim-perpetrator dichotomy, and the representation of the Palestinians as the real victims of the Holocaust. I want to show you now few caricatures on the Holocaust, and which show some of these things.
Do cancel.
Okay. I must say that till the early 90s, there were rarely caricatures about Holocaust. But the only thing which appeared before that was the equation of Zionism and Nazism. Here I have a collection from later year because they were easier to, as you see, this is one of the things, and there are different caricatures comparing and equating the Star of David and the swastika. This is a Jordanian newspaper from 2003, as you see, and this is Gaza. And in the caption, there is the Gaza Strip, or the not even concentration camp, but the annihilation camp, is the Israeli annihilation camp. As you see, big love affair. And this is an Egyptian magazine. You see that I picked up caricatures which come from different sources, from different countries. The motifs are the same motifs, unfortunately. I'm Palestinian, you see this. There is nothing, it is clear. This Latouf is a Brazilian caricaturist, and he is much more sophisticated than the regular Arab caricaturists. And his caricatures, after the last, or during the last war in Gaza, were taken and shown in almost every country and every site.
There's also an Iranian cartoon competition.
Yeah, I will show it. Sure. Yeah, he just mentioned the Iranian cartoon competition. It was declared just after the Muhammad, if you remember the crisis after the Muhammad, the Danish caricatures or cartoons about Muhammad. Ahmadinejad's response was to have a contest on the Holocaust, and this was the first prize. I think there is nothing to explain here. It was a Moroccan young fellow who won this prize. Apparently, there were more than 1,000 submissions for the contest, and I will show you a couple of them. After the contest, they had in Tehran 2 weeks an exhibit of 200 of those caricatures. This was another one, as you see. Again. Al-Hayat is one of the most liberal papers in the Arab world. It is published originally in Lebanon, but it is published in London today. And again, this is from 2001, and there is no need explain anything. Very similar one appeared after this war, during this war. You see Carlos Latouf again. This is another one. This is very interesting. It's published in a site which was somehow identified with Hezbollah. And as you see, we're talking about 6 million Jews murdered in cold blood. Well, we never get over it. And this is, of course, the American media on both sides. On the other hand, 6 million Palestinians ethnically cleaned, dispossessed, murdered, and humiliated. Well, get over it. And again, this theme reappeared during this war, again by Carlos Latouf, never again and over again. Palestinian tragedy and the Jewish tragedy, as I said, one of the major themes. Perhaps only the last one by Latouf, which is again here. I could go on, but I will stop here and continue. The Holocaust representation in the Arab public discourse has not changed until the mid-90s, despite the vicissitudes of the conflict and the political, internal, inter-Arab, and international arenas. There was no difference between the academic and the official or popular discourses, which was reflected in an ever-growing volume of controversial literature on Jewish history, Zionism, and the Palestine problem. This literature did not introduce new insights, but reinforced previous themes. Yet there was a shift of emphasis from the justification claims to all variations of denial, a trend which also typified Western revisionist literature. Soviet and revisionist discourse had an impact on the development of the Arab Holocaust discourse, especially after the Six-Day War of '67, when the Soviet penetration to the Middle East was at its peak, and Holocaust deniers became more outspoken. Yet, the '67 war brought in its wake another development. It created for the first time after 19 years a direct encounter between Palestinians and Israelis, which reinforced the unique traits of the Palestinian response to the Holocaust. In his novel Returning to Haifa, written after the '67 war, Palestinian novelist Hassan Kanafani describes a journey of Palestinian refugees, a couple from Ramallah, Said and Safia, to their home in Haifa in search of their son Khaldun, left behind as a baby in their flight in '48. Arriving in Haifa, they discovered that the house had been occupied by Holocaust survivors, Miriam and Efrat Goshen, who also adopted and raised their son. The encounter between Miriam, the widow whose husband died in the previous war, and Said and Safia raises several dominant themes in the Palestinian discourse on the Holocaust. Acknowledgement of the historical event, comparison between the Jewish and the Palestinian sufferings, and the portrayal of the Israeli soldier as ruthless as the Nazi soldier. It was the first time that an Arab novel introduced an encounter between a Palestinian and an Israeli Jew, not on the battlefield, but in a normal room, where each of them puts forth his point of view and discusses it with the other. It is significant that this Jew was a Holocaust survivor who had the potential of identifying with the Palestinian agony in view of his or her own experience. The representation of Miriam stems from the awareness that the Nazi horrors indeed took place. She arrived in Haifa with her husband on the eve of establishment of the state, and she's a decent, sensitive, and human person. She is presented in contrast to the Israeli soldier, as she was perplexed, he says, by the behavior of the Haganah members, whom she saw throwing a body of an Arab child onto a truck like a piece of wood, reminding her of her father's death in Auschwitz and her young brother shot dead at the hands of German soldiers. Those thoughts, which she never disclosed to anyone, and the arrogance exhibited by Said and Safia's soldier son, who was totally immersed in Israeli culture and rejected his biological parents, bring immediately to mind the recurring theme, the equation between the Israeli soldier and the Nazi soldier, and in a broader sense, between Zionism and Nazism. This equation was stressed after the '67 war with the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, and the shift in Israel image from an underdog to a Goliath. The Soviet propaganda, the European left's criticism of Israel, and the UN 75 resolution defining Zionism as a kind of racism intensified the use of this motif for the legitimization of Israel and Zionism. Israel and Zionism were accused of ignoring the Palestinian tragedy, despite what befell the Jews in the Nazi era. They were expected to be more sensitive to the suffering of others, since they themselves were subjected to horrible sufferings, and the Nazi persecutions in Europe were said to be exploited for the justification of the persecution of another people. The victimhood motif crystallized as a central theme in the Palestinian national narrative, as it was a major component in the Israeli and Jewish identity. The Palestinians considered themselves as the victims of the victims and strove to acquire a victim status and recognition of their tragedy, with all it entails in rights for self-determination and restoration of justice. This theme appears in other Arab discourses on the Holocaust, but the trauma of the displacement and loss was unique to them, and therefore its representation is so central in their discourse and collective memory. The accusation of Zionism of collaboration with Nazis was raised immediately after the war, received a boost by the Eichmann trial in the early 60s, and since the mid-70s was supported by academic works inspired by Soviet perceptions of the Holocaust and Zionism. In the mid-90s, however, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the signing of the Israeli-Palestinian Accords, and the Israeli-Jordanian peace agreement, liberal Arab intellectuals began to question the Arab perceptions of the Holocaust, which seemed no longer congruent with those processes. They called for the unequivocal recognition of the suffering of the Jewish people, which eventually would lead to the recognition of the Palestinian tragedy by the Israelis and facilitate reconciliation and coexistence between the two peoples. The gist of this new approach is the acknowledgement of the Holocaust as an undisputed historical fact, a crime against humanity, and the separation of its human aspects from its political repercussions. The new approach was affected by the terminology and attitudes to the Holocaust in the West, as Holocaust denial and other motifs of Holocaust representation in the traditional Arab discourse partially derived from Western and Soviet literature. The propagators of the new approach live in the West and are highly conversant with its culture and values. They generally advocate a change in the Arab attitude toward the Holocaust and do not deny its uniqueness, although most of them failed to isolate the political dimension from their discourse, despite their declared aspiration to do so. Seeking basis for coexistence, Edward Said claimed that a link exists between what happened to the Jews in World War II and the catastrophe of the Palestinian people. And unless this connection is recognized, there would be no foundation for coexistence. Said, who accused Zionism and Israel of instrumentalizing the Holocaust for their ends, falls into the trap of instrumentalization by connecting the recognition of the two tragedies. Although he insisted that he does not attach conditions to the comprehension of and compassion for the Jewish tragedy, he believed that such an advance in consciousness by Arabs ought to be met by an equal willingness for compassion and comprehension on the part of the Israelis and Israel's supporters. The Holocaust does not excuse Zionism for what it has done to Palestinians, he went on to say. Hence, by recognizing the Holocaust for the genocidal madness that it was, we can then demand from Israelis and Jews the right to link the Holocaust to Zionist injustices towards the Palestinians, link and criticize the link for its hypocrisy and flawed moral logic. Despite its relatively limited number of propagators, this approach brought about changes in the representation of the Holocaust even among its opponents. It diversified the mainstream discourse while increasingly confining denial to Islamists. The vantage point of the discourse returned to be, as in the early period prior to the establishment of the state, the acknowledgement of the Holocaust as a horrible historical fact, albeit without relinquishing other persistent themes, such as relativization and minimization of the Holocaust, equation of Zionism with Nazis, as we saw, and the accusation of Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. And this diversification of the discourse was mirrored in a few literary works and television dramas. To rest my case, I would like to conclude by showing you a short segment of an Iranian TV series, 0 Degree Turn, broadcast a year and a half ago. The Iranian production was an aberration from Ahmadinejad's denial of the Holocaust. The series was written and directed by an Iranian producer, and Holocaust denier Roger Gaudi served as historical advisor. It included 30 parts and reportedly became a hit overnight. Set in the 40s, Iran under Shah Reza and Paris on the eve of World War II, it presents a glimpse on Jewish life in Iran and on the persecution of the Jews in France with the Nazi invasion. Loosely based on a true story, according to the producer, in which Iranian Shalzeda Fair in Paris saved over 1,000 European Jews by forging passports and securing them refuge in Iran. The hero of the series, Habib Parsa, a son of an Iranian former diplomat married to a Palestinian woman from Haifa, finds himself involved in saving Jews from the Nazi claws. He is sent for studies in Paris, where he meets Sarah Struck, a young Jewish student, as they collaborated in research on elements common to Spinoza and an Arab philosopher. And it scenes of Jews with the yellow star of David getting on trucks or searched by Nazi officers. Habib falls in love with Sarah. He gains the trust of her maternal uncle, history professor Shmuel Weiss, and uses his work at the Iranian embassy to forge passports for Sarah and her mother and secure their flight to Iran. Notwithstanding its discrepancies, historical distortions, and ultimate anti-Zionist messages, the series constitutes a break not only with Iran's image as a denier of the Holocaust and supporter of Western deniers, but also with the Arab general evasion of fields on the Holocaust. Even Hollywood films dealing with the Holocaust, such as Sophie's Choice, Schindler's List, Life is Beautiful, were rejected as another Zionist propaganda ploy and banned in Arab countries, even in those with which Israel has established peace agreements. The recognition of the realities of the Holocaust in the Iranian drama does not excuse Zionism for what it has done to Palestinians and does not give Israelis a blank check to abuse them as Edward said. Indeed, the Iranian historical drama recognizes the Holocaust as a horrible event, but at the same time, it does not depart from the traditional themes and present the Jewish state as a Zionist invention, the result of collaboration between the Zionists and the Nazis to coerce Jews to emigrate to Palestine. Therefore, it is an illegitimate entity and has no right to exist. It also reinforces the similarities between the discourse in the immediate post-war period and the discourse that emerged with the new approach. Then there was an effort to separate between the Jewish problem and the Palestine problem, which enabled to acknowledge the historical facts and even express sympathy with the Jewish tragedy, and at the same time denounce Zionism, its ideology and practice. With the turn of the 20th century, the mainstream discourse accepted the occurrence of the Holocaust, but strive to challenge its uniqueness and its scope, and to delegitimize Israel and Zionism. Thank you. Just showing now. I lost it.
Indeed. Email.
کردم تا بهار برگشتی وطنه.
یه چند روزی به تخت افتاد. سارا مادرش کجا؟
خونه یکی از دوستان غیر یهودی پنهان شدن. منم جهت برداشتن یه سری مدارک اومدم اینجا.
خانم پروفسور، من برای شما و خانواده‌تون خبر خوبی
دارم. بهتره از اینجا بریم. نازی‌ها دارن خونه ها رو برای شناسایی و فرستادن یهودی‌ها به اردوگاه کار اجباری می‌گردن. بریم. شوهر مهربون از دوستان قدیمی منم، مادام دو پاری و میسیو رفی.
از دیدنتون خوشبختم.
ما هم همینطور.
خوش اومدین.
دیر کردی. آقای پارسا اینجا چی کار میکنن؟
میگم. نه خودت بهشون بگو دوستم.
خب من چند تا گذرنامه ایرانی براتون فراهم کردم تا بتونید همراه اون دسته از اتباع یهودی ایرانی که امروز و فردا عازم ایران هستن پاریس رو ترک کنید.
فکر میکنم دیگه بهتر از این نمیشه.
نمیدونم چطور تشکر کنم، اما ما که در ایران کسی رو نمیشناسیم.
جای نگرانی نیست. به محض ورود همراه این نامه و نشانی که روی پاکت قید شده برید پیش خانواده من. اونا ترتیب اقامتتون براتون
متشکرم. من میرم ماشین آماده کنم. ضمن دوست قدیمی موشیمنوین هم اونجا اقامت داره. از کمک به شما دریغ نخواهد کرد.
طوری حرف میزنه انگار نمیخوای با ما بیاد.
طوری از شما سخت راشه. با این حرف بهتره من همینجا بمونم.
اما پروفسور من که برای شما هم گذرنامه تهیه کردم.
ازت ممنونم پسر جان، اما اخلاقا درست نیست من در این شرایط هموطنامو.
Okay, so Esther's agreed to take some questions. Questions on the paper?
Where was it filmed?
In Budapest, partly in Budapest, partly in Paris.
Oh, Professor Hyman.
How was that television show received? It's an interesting spin,
Right.
because it adds also to the Zionist distortion of history, because in fact this notion of 1,000 Jews saved by, we don't know this. I'm a scholar of Holocaust.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's just how it's understood. And so I guess there are two separate questions. One was how was the whole series received? And the second would be how was this particular theme within the series received?
As I said, that the series was received very well in Iran. It was really a hit, and people really kept seeing it every day. It's a 30-part series. How this particular theme was received, I cannot tell you. I really don't know. It wasn't really a distortion. You said a Zionist distortion. It's not a distortion. It's not knowing yet. I mean, in Holocaust studies, still many researches and studies are done, and you
But I'm
always
saying,
find those things.
I'm saying, by presenting this as the Iranian and Arab involvement with the Holocaust, and I'm sure that there must have been some discussion in the press about the fact that general histories of the Holocaust do not include this. And they don't. I will tell you, they don't.
They don't include, but now there are in different places that people are researching the Holocaust of the Libyan Jews, what happened in Morocco, a book on North Africa just was published a couple of years ago by Robert Satloff, and in fact one of the names he mentioned there was a candidate for receiving yeah, exactly, from Yad Vashem. So the awareness to what happened, first of all, to the Jews and to the cooperation and to the assistance of Muslims during the Holocaust is growing. There was a Muslim mufti in the Grand Algeria, in the Grand Mosque in Paris, who saved about 1,000 Jews in his mosque.
I'll talk.
So, okay.
Was there a second part to the film that showed in contrast with the...
Yeah, it's all, yes, exactly.
Really?
You could already notice here, but I didn't want you to. You have the good guys, Jews, and the bad Jews. and the bad Jews were Zionists. And during the series, when they show for even, so you will see, I mean, in the series you can see those who came in the car and were inspecting the place were the bad guys who wanted to get documents from that Jewish professor who had documents about Zionist, about alleged Zionist Nazi cooperation. And so this is one scene there, I mean, this is one stream in which the construct is being built. The other is in Iran itself. They show how the Iranian Jewish community was thriving in Iran, and with the infiltration of Zionists to the community, they destabilized the Jewish life. They killed, they murdered the Jewish rabbi, and so on. So you could see on both sides, both things. But what reached me, which was really an admiration, as I said, was that the first few scenes which we saw, which really brought the Holocaust home to that was never seen anywhere in the Middle East before.
You mentioned that after the Oslo Accords, there was a sort of change in attitude. People began to accept there was a Holocaust.
It's not people began, yeah, I said that there was a change among certain intellectual circles, and they brought about a change in the mainstream discourse, whereas you don't really accept the crude denial of Ahmadinejad.
And since that time, when everybody's hardening on both sides, has there been a reversal again?
No, it's not. It's not reversal. It is there. Yes, surely their voices are less prominent. I mean, there were never too many, by the way, but they wrote a lot, and they got people to answer, to respond, and there was a lively debate in the papers on different occasions where the Holocaust came up. Even as a response to Ahmadinejad's statements when he first started to make them, when he became a president, you could find those who identified with him and said that he is really, he is the voice of us, and we are not, and we are only afraid to express these views, whereas there were others who denounced him, and quite a few, like exactly as it happened now. There were a few who denounced his speech in the UN, in the Geneva Conference, of course, because they understand that in many ways he is really harming their cause with such statements.
So if I can make a point also, when I was in Geneva, I met with Berber organizations from Libya, Algeria, and Morocco, and they spoke. It was shocking at some levels because they spoke a lot about the history of the Holocaust and how their families actually helped to save Jews in North Africa, and how the various regimes teach sort of the Arabization of their culture and the Islamicization of their culture, and how the perception of Israel is taught as children, that they were, in their educational system, they're taught to hate Jews in Israel, but there sort of seems to be some sort of, I don't know, an awareness or a renaissance, particularly among the Berber community, and their view of Israel, their view of the Holocaust, it was shocking. Are you aware of these sort of trends in North African society?
Especially among the Berbers, definitely among the Berbers, because they have contacts with Israelis all the time.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's not only there are a few who are. And again, there are few, but they have the capacity to somehow influence at least discourse. And I don't know if it will bring about an absolute change. I'm not that optimistic, but something is there.
So just to back up what was said, my point, there seems to be a space between the regime and official ideology and official policy, and then on the ground people have diverse ideas and perceptions
Right.
of these issues. So, can
Yes.
you gauge how, there's the official line, which we know about, and
No,
there's
no,
the,
you cannot talk about an official line. There is no official line. I mean, general.
in terms of curriculum.
Curriculum, you don't refer to the Holocaust. You don't. You don't teach the Holocaust. You don't refer to the Holocaust. Even when you talk about World War II, you hardly mention that. And I have few books from Egypt and Syria. And whenever it is mentioned in connection with what happened in Palestine. So as I said, it is politicized from the very beginning. You have no details, you have no stories, you don't accept the Zionist or Jewish ethos or the Western historiography about the Holocaust. That's what you see in the press, that's what you see everywhere, but you don't teach, on purpose that there was no Holocaust or whatever. The only place where today people are, when they are engaged in writing books on Holocaust, denying the Holocaust, is in Iran, unfortunately. There are few books in the Arab world as well, because with the trend of accepting the Holocaust, as I said, since we got not a reverse, and we have a group of people who went to the other side, demanding to deny the Holocaust and understanding, thinking that recognition of the Holocaust is not congruent with the Palestinian rights and self-determination. It's a contradiction. If you have this, you cannot have that. But again, those are mostly Islamists.
And just one final point before I ask the question. 2 weeks ago in UNESCO, there was a major project that was launched, Project Aviv,
Yes.
by the Shoah Foundation,
Yeah.
and many Islamic countries are present. There were 3,000 people, mostly Muslims from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, and they're translating books like Primo Levi's books and other books into Arabic and Persian, and it's a great success. And President Wade of Senegal was there, and he said that Holocaust denial is a war against the Jews, and a war against the Jews is a war against humanity. So it was very powerful meeting, very good. So there's good things happening.
Yes,
And that-
definitely. I in fact recommended to Abe Ratkin
Yeah.
a few of the names.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Okay. So one comment, one question. So first you were talking about how they're influenced by the communist narratives about the Holocaust. It's just something that I work on and I'm interested in. But so there's also the separation between good Jews that are not Zionists and bad Jews that are Zionists is also very common in the way communists present the Holocaust and Jews and saving Jews, and it's just fascinating. And watching this film, it just reminded me of that. There are the religious Jews, good Jews, that represent true Judaism, and then there's the bad Jews, the Zionists. And so my question is not related to this at all. You were also talking about the Israeli-Palestinian encounter in Israel, and I was also thinking that maybe the way, or what you think about maybe the way the Palestinians also construct their narrative about what happened to them is also influenced by the way Israelis or Jews construct their narratives,
Definitely,
and this mirroring of
exactly.
tragedies and things.
Yeah, I can give you an article that I just wrote about this topic. Long story, yes, definitely. There is a new book coming up, edited by Meir Litvak, and there I have a paper, a chapter on the Holocaust and the Nakba, definitely.
Gentleman here.
Charles, this is directed at you. I'm sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
In the next few weeks, there's going to be an election in Iran. What is the feeling of the young people? Will they vote against the president or perhaps throw him out of office? Maybe it's part of the wish.
It's part of the wish, probably. Yeah, I'm not an expert on Iran, but of course I follow up as a scholar of the East. And yes, so they are on
TV.
Emotionally.
It's my microphone, it's not gonna make it
exactly.
louder.
It's going to the camera.
Yeah, but it doesn't go to
No.
the, okay. There are those Iranian youth who do not like Ahmadinejad. And they are not few, they are quite a lot. Yeah, but nobody knows, and apparently the support of the Khamenei and the council of experts who are more conservative will probably influence the votes. Apparently, I mean, probably he will win. Unfortunately, but that's, there are Israelis, by the way, and others who think it's a very good thing that he continues to be in office because he does us a service. I am not sure I agree with this approach, but this is an approach exists.
I was thinking there's a dissonance in the film, is that people are not stupid, and they look to compare people walking in the street in Europe, let's say, without wearing chadors, compared to what they're now. They're comparing if they're good Jews and bad Jews. Maybe they're good Iranians and bad Iranians, especially if they have access to the internet. No matter, I think the internet would be more powerful than the printed book.
Right.
And this stimulates thinking, even though it's a drama of other sort. Is there any feedback? People come and ask questions?
If people come and ask questions, people on internet have interactions with Israelis. So, but again, you have this kind of people, you have that kind of people. It's a very diversified and interesting society, the Iranian society. And you can find very diverse range of opinions. Unfortunately, the ruling regime is pursuing one line and one kind of policy. And it has its impact on society as well. It has its impact. It cannot ignore.
And during your talk, I guess I was contemplating the question of Holocaust denial on one side, and I'll call it the pure Holocaust deniers, and on the other side, groups who recognize that the Holocaust did take place, but are concentrating on the propaganda question of stating that the Jews, the Palestinians are now the Jews, you know? And I'm thinking, this is what I'd like to bounce off you, I'm thinking, at least from the Arab-Israeli conflict point of view, that's, I think, maybe more damaging to Israel to deal with that than plain Holocaust denial, which I think most of the world accepts as something off the table.
I agree with you. And as a matter of fact, this was a major theme in the reaction to the recent Israeli operation in Gaza. And it's not only Arabs who used the equation of the Palestinian tragedy as we saw it with the Holocaust, and using Holocaust metaphors to describe what happened there and what's happening in Gaza or the West Bank, and you are definitely right. This even Europeans accept. They don't see it as we see it, as anti-Semitic or anything wrong, and we have to really take this into consideration.
I have a related question. So, one of the possible responses to the Holocaust is, well, the Jews deserved it, you know, because they're so bad. So, in the current equating Israel with the Nazis, you know, is part of that. Do you see much of, well, Israel's just like the Nazis, so they deserve what happened to them in the Holocaust?
They will. No. This is really to make a kind of.
So sort of backwards.
Yes.
So
No.
backwards.
But it's as I mentioned, what I said. The end of Israel or the fate of Israel will be like that of the Nazis, because this is the fate of tyrants. But you're right. I'm going to ask something else about the justification of the Holocaust. And the justification of the Holocaust was not necessarily connected with Jews or Israelis being Nazis, but Jews as being corrupt, Jews as being with double allegiance, Jews as being not loyal to their countries. And in fact, in a way, they accept the German narrative about the role of the Jews against Germany.
Yes, we have time for one more.
I just have a comment about something you said. You mentioned you were surprised that the president of Switzerland entertained the president of Iran. I may have an explanation.
I don't know if I was surprised, but I didn't think it was appropriate.
An Iranian friend of mine, Dr. Mahmoud Norbash, who frequently traveled from Tehran to New Haven, he was a medical resident here, noticed that after the revolution, if he took a flight from Tehran to Zurich, coming to the plane at the last minute in Mercedes were mullahs with attaché cases, obviously going to Zurich for a specific reason, and that was to deposit funds into accounts in Zurich. So that may be the explanation for the economic cordiality of the president of Switzerland.
I suspect you're correct. Okay. Wonderful.
Do you see any relationship between those who accept the fact of the Holocaust versus those who do not, and those who still believe in a two-state solution, and those who believe in a one-state solution, which means the end of Israel?
Not really.
Don't see any relationship.
No, not really. Among those who propagate the idea of the one-state solution was, for instance, Azmi Bishara, the Israeli MK, is now in somewhere in where he was in Geneva. Okay. He never denied the Holocaust. On the contrary, he wrote about it. I think he wrote the first piece ever on Arab representation of the Holocaust. So, and he criticized, in fact, the denial of the Holocaust by the Arabs and tried to explain it. He connected that to the instrumentalization of the Holocaust by Israel and Zionism. And he saw Arab reaction as a reaction to this instrumentalization. So it's not necessarily so. People who recognize the Holocaust, and many of them propagate the idea of a one-state solution.
For both parties. They agreed on that.
I mean, on both sides, yes. one statesman, they see it in a different way, of course, but you cannot really guide them.
So on behalf of YIISA, thank you very much, Esther, for a quick announcement. Today was the last seminar, so the seminar series for the academic year is finished. So we don't see some of you. I hope you have a good summer, and the seminar series will pick up again in September. We have a big conference coming up on next Tuesday, the 28th of April. It's entitled The Psychological Impact of the Threat of Contemporary Genocidal Antisemitism, From Denial and Paralysis to Understanding the Challenge. And it's going to be a very interesting symposium, full-day conference with leading scholars of psychology and psychiatry, trying to look at the impact of contemporary antisemitism and responses or lack of responses to it. So it should be a good day. It starts at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning in LC 101. So if you make it, it goes throughout the day, so if you can't be the whole day, you're very welcome to sort of come in and as the day unfolds. So I hope to see you there, and have a great summer if we don't see you until September. Thank you.